In Assassin's Creed, we've seen Templars take on a lot of different forms, but no matter the era, their goal is always the same. Whether it's via a piece of Eden, through religion, order, or just whatever it is, the Templars will stop at nothing to create their so-called order, even if it means destroying everyone and everything in the way. So what I want to do is rank every Templar organization from worst to best, in terms of just how dominant, how powerful, and how impactful they were. But before I get into it, let's talk about the best video game deals that you could ask for. It's summer, and at any point of the year, it's always the best time to treat yourself or somebody else to a great game. Just please don't go gifting Mind's Eye. Seriously, if you give somebody Mind's Eye, you either hate them or just don't know better. Instead, head over to Instant Gaming, where you can get the best deals on any game at any time. So you don't need to wait for Black Friday or any type of traditional sale. Instant Gaming has fantastic discounts on a ton of great titles from all sorts of genres. Personally, I've been eyeing a few must-plays from some brilliant franchises. One of them being Monster Hunter Wilds, which I unfortunately missed out on launch. So now is the best time to catch up on these games that I missed without even breaking the bank whatsoever. So yeah, definitely check out Instant Gaming for the best video game deals. Link is right there in the description. But don't wait around too long. These kinds of deals do not last forever. Okay, so coming in dead last in the ranking, we've got the Louisiana Rite of the Templar Order from Assassin's Creed Liberation. And truthfully, it's quite tricky to rank which of these Templar orders comes in dead last, as there are so many things to factor in. But let's be completely honest, compared to the other Templar branches, the Louisiana Rite was just tiny and short-lived. And if anything, they just never had any impactful global reach at all. It was basically a side project run by Madeleine Delisle, who built the whole operation in New Orleans under the direction of the Parisian Rite, and also had to work alongside the British Rite. So already this group wasn't even the ones in charge technically. They were, working alongside the others. And for a Templar group that consisted of literally 5 members, that's not exactly the most commanding. Now, don't get me wrong, Madeleine as a character was just a B-word, and she did a lot of manipulation that we did not really see on screen. For example, she poisoned her husband, she ran a fake abolitionist front, and then tricked her stepdaughter Aveline into joining the order. Well, she almost did. But for all of that scheming, it just didn't amount to much in the grand scheme of things. Their biggest, let's just say, power move was trying to excavate one of the famous wonders of the world, being Chichen Itza, to find a first civilization artifact called the Prophecy Disc. They even teamed up with the British and Spanish Templars, they used slave labor, and also ran a full-on trafficking network to get it all done. But in the end, their whole operation was dismantled by Aveline out of everyone, almost single-handedly. She took out their important members, exposed all their secrets, and to top it off, Aveline even assassinated Madeleine right there in the middle of their own induction ceremony. Now, in terms of how long they were around for, I mean, they barely lasted 30 years, and they just did not spread beyond Louisiana and Mexico. And once their leadership was actually taken out, they were the definition of not standing on business, because they folded instantly. Compared to the Borgia family in Rome or even the Colonial Templars in America, which I'll go over later, this Templar group was just frail and incomparable. I do genuinely think any assassin could take them out. So yeah, the Louisiana Rite sits comfortably at the bottom of my video. Okay, so next up we have the Order of the Ancients from Assassin's Creed Mirage, and the reason they are quite low in the video is for a few reasons. So if we actually think about this group, I'd like to say that they had some pretty serious ambitions. They were inserted right in the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate, which, if you are not aware, is one of the most powerful empires of the time. And the Order here had their hands in, everything. I mean, think about politics, think about the army, think about science and religion, a lot of pretty big ideas. And their leader Kabia played a massive role in why these guys are not dead last. So if you aren't aware, Kabia was the Caliph's favorite concubine. Now, to put into perspective how important that is, this means she had the literal ruler of the empire under her thumb, which, is a pretty big advantage to have. But you see, here's the thing, for all their influence, they did not last at all. Their main goal was to find ezio artifacts, especially within a temple hidden under the hidden one stronghold at Alamut. They enslaved people for excavation work, they ran all sorts of experiments on human test subjects, they manipulated the elite of Baghdad, you name it. And yet it all fell apart very fast. Basim, if you think about it, is not even at his peak. He just came off being a petty street thief. Then he joined the Hidden Ones, and with these he just tears through their entire organization one by one. He takes out Kabia's top lieutenants in every district of Baghdad, where each one of them ran their own operations ranging from tax scams to full-on human experimentation. And to me, it's kind of insane how fast their empire crumbles once somebody actually pushes back. Even when Kabia tries to bounce back by working with local governors and planning an assault on Alamut, it's too little too late. She gets assassinated by Rashan before she can actually do anything meaningful, and her whole order just collapses. Even their extended influence in Byzantium ends in failure after the Hidden Ones take down their leader named Isaac and rescue a prince named Leo from an assassination plot. So yeah, while they seemed powerful at face value, the Mirage branch of the Order of the Ancients was short-lived and weak, and they had absolutely no lasting legacy whatsoever. Next up is the Russian Rite of the Templar Order. Now, while they've had moments of real power, don't get me wrong, especially across different centuries, they never quite reached the dominance or cohesion of other Templar branches. And when you focus specifically on Assassin's Creed Chronicles Russia, it's pretty clear why. So in this game, the Templar Order is still operating during the Russian Revolution War. Their grip on power is fading and fading fast. The Romanovs are gone, who, if you are not aware, were a European royal house that Russian Templars controlled. And to top it off, the assassins at the time made some pretty big moves, especially the protagonist of the game, Nikolai Orlov. Now, he's a seasoned assassin who's basically been in a long-running back and forth war with the Templars for decades. By this point, he's very tired, he's disillusioned, and he just wants to get his family out the country. The Templars, though, still want control over powerful artifacts, especially the precursor box. And this is where the Russian Rite really shows their hand. They're quite a desperate organization. They kidnap a girl named Anastasia, who may or may not have been the Grand Duchess, and they plan to use the box to manipulate or possibly control her. Now, to me, for a Templar organization, it's not exactly some type of grand scheme of world domination. It's more like a last-ditch effort to stay relevant. And, you know, they failed pretty hard. Nikolai Orlov ends up working with Anastasia after she briefly shares his memories through the box. The two take down the Templar leadership operating in the shadows of the collapsing empire. And then by the end, Nikolai Orlov vanishes with the box, leaving the Russian Rite of the Templar Order just gutted. If anything, their presence at that time after Nikolai Orlov did what he did was more tragic than anything. They had quite a lot of influence back during the days of the Tsars, with allies like Rasputin and even Joseph Stalin later on. But by the time of Assassin's Creed Chronicles Russia, it's definitely a shadow of its former self. So yeah, while the Russian Templars had a long history, touching everything from the Romanovs to Soviet Russia, you know, I'd say their failure to adapt and their total defeat in Chronicles Russia locked them near the bottom in my video. This one is an interesting one because the Byzantine Templars who we see featured in Revelations were a group that was more about nostalgia if anything. There is no information as to when they formed or how they formed, but one thing is for sure, they had some sort of ambition and a pretty decent legacy. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, the Byzantine Templars were driven underground. And I mean that literally. They regrouped in Cappadocia, in the hidden city of Derinkuyu, dreaming of restoring their lost empire and retaking Constantinople from the Ottomans. Now, for a time, they were one of the last major Templar rites left in Europe after the collapse of the Roman branch, and that gave them a temporary edge. Under the leadership of Prince Ahmed, who is a secret Templar, and also more importantly an heir to the Ottoman throne, they had a real shot at reshaping the region. They sought to find the massive keys to unlock Altair's library, and then possibly locate the Grand Temple, which we know is a big Isu site. So in terms of vision, they definitely dreamt big. But then Ezio Auditore showed up. Now, Ezio's arrival in Constantinople marked the beginning of the end. Over the course of Revelations, he systematically dismantled their network one by one and assassinated their big leaders, including Manuel and the fanatical Shakulu, and then recovered all the massive keys before the Templars could. Ahmed's final desperate power play was to use the keys to gain leverage, but you see that ended in an insane set-piece chase and his execution by his very own brother Selim, who had no patience for Templars whatsoever. And so with Ahmed dead, the Byzantine Templar dream just finally collapsed, and it simply dissolved into nothing. Okay, for this one, I've gone with the Persian Order of the Ancients from Assassin's Creed Odyssey's Legacy of the First Blade. So not the Cult of Cosmos, because they were not part of any order, nor did they ever have ties with them whatsoever. Now as for the Persian Order, whilst they were one of the earliest and most fierce branches of the order, their reach and threat level just don't stack up compared to the organizations that you'll see later in the video. Now, to be fair, they had a strong presence during the Achaemenid Empire, and when I say strong, I mean it. They were not amateurs whatsoever, as during that time, they were already manipulating kings like Xerxes I and his son Artaxerxes, using them as pawns to push their own agenda. Their obsession with control and domination was, very classic Templar, but back then, they were known simply as the Order of the Ancients. Still, even from the start, cracks were starting to show. Darius, the original hidden blade wielder, caught on to them early and assassinated Xerxes, kicking off a centuries-long feud that would eventually tear them apart. Fast forward to Legacy of the First Blade, and we see their Persian branch chasing Darius all the way to Greece, where they are obsessed with wiping out so-called tainted ones, who are basically humans with ezio blood. They see these people as ticking time bombs, capable of destabilizing entire civilizations. So yeah, their motives were definitely on the crazier side, but their actions were just plain brutal. The Order sent specialized subgroups like the Order of Hunters, the Order of Storm, and then the Order of Dominion to hunt down Cassandra, who they also viewed as a massive threat. They caused chaos across Macedonia and Achaia, manipulating literal armies, burning tons of villages, kidnapping children, and even launching full-on military assaults. I mean, they even developed a naval superweapon and tried blockading major ports. But, despite all their resources and sub-factions, they were consistently outplayed. Both Cassandra and Darius dismantled their operations piece by piece. Every leader that they sent, so Pactias, Phila, and eventually even Amorges himself was taken down. By the time their main stronghold in Messenia fell, the Persian Order of the Ancients had basically been wiped off the map. This one is confusing to rank because I don't really know much about them, but the British East India Company aligned Templars are next in the ranking. Now, while they had some real power during the height of the British Empire, they fall in the lower end of this video because their influence was more opportunistic than doing any type of planning, and they were ultimately outplayed by local resistance out of everyone. So the British East India Company itself was a massive global powerhouse, essentially a corporation with the authority of a nation. It had its own army, its own navy, its own trade routes, and they even had colonial influence across India and Southeast Asia. So naturally, the Templar Order saw it as the perfect vessel to spread their ideals of, standard Templar stuff, like control, order, and dominance to commerce and imperial power. By the 1800s, their Templar agents, like William Sleeman, were searching for pieces of Eden hidden across India. Sleeman in particular used the company's resources to locate ancient ezio temples, using a precursor box and the Koh-i-Noor, which if you don't know is in my opinion the most powerful piece of Eden in the entire lore hands down, to uncover their secrets. Now you may think, what could possibly go wrong having that much power with those artifacts? Well, you see, Sleeman was not a subtle man whatsoever. All of what he did drew the attention of Arbazmir, an assassin who made it his mission to stop him. Chronicles India shows the downfall of this Templar-led effort. Despite having a powerful artifact, the company's Templars were undone. Arbazmir not only recovered the Koh-i-Noor, but also dismantled their entire plans. He exposed the limits of Templar power when operating in unfamiliar territory. So yeah, the British East India Company, who aligned with the Templars, had plenty of money, soldiers, and a global reach, but they were never fully in control. They were more of a colonial extension of the Order instead of being a cohesive branch with their own legacy. Next up is the Chinese Rite of the Templar Order, a group with one of the longest running histories in the entire Assassin's Creed franchise. I'm talking about an organization that's been active since the Qin dynasty, over 2,000 years ago. Now that's pretty ancient even by Templar standards. This branch helped Qin Shi Huang, China's first emperor, unify the country. You might recognize that name as one of the names that was assassinated and was put on a statue under Villa Auditore in Assassin's Creed 2. Now this Templar branch backed him in so many powerful ways, whether it's politically, influencing massive state projects like the Great Wall of China, and even helped consolidate one of the most powerful empires in history. So yeah, their origin story is pretty insane, and despite the emperor being assassinated by an early assassin named Wei Yu, the order just kept on going and going. They survived countless civil wars, they survived rebellions, even through dynasties, and by the Tang dynasty, they had evolved into the Golden Turtles, planting themselves in the imperial court. But you see, power bred instability. An internal conflict between two pretty big members led to a full-blown rebellion, and while it caused temporary chaos, the Order still did their thing. They hit their peak during the Ming Dynasty, when they had total control of the imperial court through a faction known as the Eight Tigers, who were this elite group of Templar eunuchs who practically ruled China from the shadows. In fact, they were quite powerful to the point where they, I believe, almost eradicated the entire Chinese Brotherhood. They did all of these purges, they manipulated the emperor, and in short, they were almost untouchable. Now do note, I said almost untouchable, because of course nothing lasts forever. Eventually, Xiao Jun and the assassins fought back, dismantling the Eight Tigers and triggering the long decline of the Chinese Rite. By the early 20th century, their influence was fading pretty fast. Now, to be fair, they did try to regain control during the Republic era, but those efforts completely backfired. One of the allies they allied with just used them, then discarded them, refusing to share any sort of power with them because they were that weak. So yeah, while the Chinese Templars once held empires in the palm of their hand, their decline was just so massive. They lacked global expansion, they failed to just adapt, and then eventually were reduced to little pawns in a rapidly changing China. Next up is the Portuguese Templar Order, which is seen in Assassin's Creed Shadows. Now this branch lands solidly in the lower middle of the ranking. Now not because they lacked any sort of power goal at all, but because their reach was never quite translated into lasting dominance at all. In fact, after Assassin's Creed Shadows, nothing is known about the Portuguese Templar Order. Now at face value, the Portuguese Templars seemed like they were about to be set up for greatness. I say that because they were backed by the wealth of Portugal's global empire during the Age of Exploration. They had access to ships, colonies and trade routes stretching from Europe to Asia, and one of their voyages sent them to Japan around 1560, when Nuno Caro, who's just a regular Templar, was sent to search for a piece of Eden. What he found instead was the imperial regalia, which were the symbols of divine rule in Japanese culture. Now, while the artifacts don't hold any type of ezio power at all, despite being artifacts Templars are meant to be searching for, so you know that's a bit of poor storytelling from Quebec, but hey, another topic for another video. Nuno Caro saw their value and lied to the inner sanctum, securing more funding by pretending that they had some sort of advanced capabilities. I guess you can say that's clever, but also very risky. Now, to make presence more threatening in Japan, Nuno Caro allied himself with Ashikaga Yoshiaki, the former shogun of Japan, and helped form a splinter faction known as the Shinbaku, aiming to restore Yoshiaki's power. He also manipulated some highly regarded figures like Akechi Mitsuhide, which we see to betray Oda Nobunaga. He recruited a man named Kimura Kei, who is a daimyo of Japan, into training people for the Templar Order, and to top it off, he manipulated the daughter of Akechi Mitsuhide to become a Templar by kidnapping her younger brother. Now for a moment, it looked like the Templars might actually control Japan, but then came the reckoning. Yasuke along with Naoe launched a resistance that tore the Templars' Japanese operations apart. They tore down the Shinbaku one by one that the Templars had set up. Yasuke assassinated the important Templar figures, including Nuno Caro himself, effectively ending their influence in the region before it could solidify. I guess their attempt to use, Japanese culture to dominate the entire of Japan is why I've not placed it that low in the video, but it's kind of impressive. However, it is unsustainable. If they had a more lasting appeal, I would rank them higher, but unfortunately they do not. The West Indies Rite of the Templar Order, which is featured mostly in Black Flag, was one of the most dangerous and even fairly ambitious Templar branches in the early modern era. So this organization was established during the golden age of piracy, and their mission was quite different from many others. They did not want regional control. Well, they did, but it wasn't the primary goal, which is what I'm trying to get at. Their mission was more so focused on global surveillance, which was done through the observatory. Now, all they needed was a sample of blood, and this could be capable of tracking anybody via that single drop of blood. It was a powerful tool, and the Templars believed it would help them maintain order by keeping watch over the world. They were led by a man whose name I'm about to butcher, Laureano de Torres, who was the Spanish governor of Cuba, and he spent over 20 years just trying to find the observatory, using resources from both the Spanish Empire and Templar allies across the region. He also brought in people like Woodes Rogers, Julien Ducasse, and Lawrence Prince to support the cause. Of course, their plans were disrupted by our main man, Edward Kenway, and funnily enough, he did not intend to get involved, especially as we know he killed an assassin named Duncan Walpole and took his identity. He then learned of the Templars' gold and the value of the observatory. That one error of not realizing who was truly at that meeting unraveled the West Indies Templars. Over time, Edward dismantled their leadership one by one. There's of course all the Templars in the main story that he kills, and even the optional Templar hunts with the likes of Hilary Flint, Lucia Marquez, Kenneth Abraham, and so on. Edward also had taken out some of his former friends who betrayed the Pirate Alliance to turn to the Templars. And despite the West Indies Templars' efforts, even including near total assaults on assassin bureaus and acquiring a fragment of Eden, the West Indies Templars never achieved true control. Even after Torres finally accessed the observatory in 1722, it was just too late. Edward killed him at the site, ending the Templars' decade-long quest in a single final strike. So yeah, the West Indies Rite was powerful and well funded, to be fair. They were also kind of scarily close to total domination, but like many of the Templar failures that we see in Assassin's Creed, their weakness was just pure arrogance and their refusal to see the threat in the pirate standing right next to them. After their fall, the Caribbean remained out of Templar hands for generations. So of all the rites brought down by a singular man, this one right here might be one of the more interesting ones. Okay, we're moving into the top half of the ranking, and at whatever number this places, we have the Parisian Rite of the Templar Order, or basically the French Templars. Now, this Templar Order was one of the most important and powerful branches of the Templars, especially in Europe. It had a long history in France going all the way back to the days of Charlemagne, during the times when they were called the Order of Ancients. So already legacy-wise, they are definitely near the top. Now, over the centuries, the Templars became deeply involved in everything France. I'm talking the politics there and even the royal affairs. Now, at times, the French Templars were just out in the open, for example during the Crusades, but other times they worked in the shadows, especially after they were outlawed in the early 1300s. By the 1700s, during the time of Assassin's Creed Unity, the French Templars were incredibly influential, and I mean that literally. They had people in the king's inner circle, and they ran everything from all the wealth there to the literal control over powerful institutions. So in terms of dominance, they were definitely near the top. Francois de la Serre, the Grand Master at the time, even tried to keep a peace deal going with the assassins. That's how confident and stable the French Templars had become. But that stability did not last whatsoever. After Francois de la Serre was suddenly murdered, a more extreme and evil Templar named Francois Thomas Germain took over. Now, he thought the order had become weak, and to him it needed to be quote-unquote reborn. So he helped stir up the French Revolution, using that mess to take power and push his radical vision. This caused a civil war within the Templar Order itself. You know, there were some Templars that supported Francois Thomas Germain's plan, while other Templars like Elise de la Serre tried to stop him. But you see, in the end, the infighting and the revolution tore the French Templars apart. Most of its top members were either killed or lost their power. Still, for most of its history, the French Templars were an unstoppable and dominant force, able to influence literal kings, run cities, and even shape how society worked. You know, I'd say their downfall did not really happen because they weren't strong or anything like that, but instead it just happened because they couldn't agree on how to move forward when the world around them was changing. Okay, coming into the next spot in the video, we've got the British Rite of the Templar Order, and let me just say, this is where we really start to see the Templar orders that are considered, dominant. This Templar branch was without question one of the most powerful and outright dangerous groups in the entire franchise. I'm talking about a group that had centuries of reach, from the days of King Arthur and Excalibur to Victorian London under Starrick Industries. So in terms of longevity, they are easily up there. And by the 19th century, under Grand Master Crawford Starrick, they had London on lockdown. I mean, they ran the banks, they ran, the medicine, the transport system, you name it. Their monopoly on crime through the Blighters, combined with their control of infrastructure, gave them so much power over one of the world's most important cities. And it felt like they were trying to rule with the idea of replacing the entire ruling class with Templars. Starrick wanted literal dominion. Their ambitions went even further with Pieces of Eden. They hunted for the likes of the Apple, they hunted for the Shroud, and you know what, they nearly pulled it off. Of course, if it wasn't for Jacob and Evie Fry, Crawford Starrick could have achieved full-scale domination, literally becoming invincible with the Shroud of Eden. But alas, arrogance strikes again. The Frys, with the help from allies like Henry Green, took down Crawford Starrick and his entire leadership one by one. And with Starrick gone, the British Templars just crumbled very hard. Now, why didn't I rank them any higher? Well, the answer is quite simple. Despite their insane power, they lost it all in one very fast moment. It was just two assassins that dismantled a century of control in under 1 year. Still, their historical legacy and sheer scope cannot be denied. They went from Arthur's Excalibur to Victorian monopolies, and even helped shape global events like the Crusades and the British Empire. Oh, and I almost forgot. They literally gave rise to Abstergo, which I'll get into later in the video. So yeah, the British Rite of the Templar Order from Assassin's Creed Syndicate ranks very high, but it's not quite at the top. Now, next in the video is the Order of the Ancients from Assassin's Creed Valhalla. Now, there will be some people that would say, how are they this low? Because after all, this group was the original foundation for the entire Templar Order. They've been around since the very start, and they even shaped entire civilizations. And yeah, that legacy is insane. But in Valhalla, apart from them nearing their downfall, they were literally a full-blown powerhouse moving secretly across Anglo-Saxon England. And to be fair, they were terrifyingly effective. At the time of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, this version of the Order was everywhere, in every corner of English society. Everybody who mattered was either working for them or unknowingly being moved around like a piece on their board. And the thing is, nobody even realized it, since their reach was just so big. Now, the Order in Valhalla weren't exactly loud about their goals, but make no mistake, they were chasing after ezio knowledge to try and unlock divine memory through human vessels. Fulke especially brought that darkness to the surface. Her experiments on Sigurd was her big obsession with the Order controlling the next phase of human evolution. She wanted to reawaken Sigurd as the ezio Tia by literally removing his arm. Now, to me, it feels like if nobody had stopped the Order in Valhalla, they could have easily restructured the world into something unrecognizable. But you know what makes this story even more interesting to me is how they fell. They fell because they were taken down by somebody who was never even supposed to be involved. Alfred of Wessex, their own Grand Magister, decided he hated everything the Order stood for. So instead of exposing them, he reworked their entire downfall from the inside, using Eivor, a Viking of all people, to dismantle them piece by piece. And when it was all over, he rebuilt the Order in his own image, laying the groundwork for the Templars as we know them. So yeah, apart from the Order of the Ancients in Valhalla being insanely influential and kind of dominant, the way they ended was very interesting. And you know, if you think about it, even in death, they gave rise to something even bigger, known as the Templars. And speaking of the Templars, this one is a classic. The Levantine Templars from Assassin's Creed 1 were the first important face of the Templar Order after Assassin's Creed Valhalla's time that we ever saw, and they were no joke at all. They were pretty much the flagship arm of the Templar Order during the Crusades. In Assassin's Creed 1, these Templars were already pretty far into their plans. They had leaders placed all over the region, Crusader cities, Saracen strongholds, even within hospitals or mosques. And it seemed like they were pretty much controlling how people lived, how they thought and what they believed. And you know, if you played Assassin's Creed 1, the scary part is that they were very close to pulling it off. After Robert de Sable took over as Grand Master, the Templars focused on gaining an Apple of Eden for control, and this was of course beneath Solomon's Temple. They secretly allied with Al-Mualim, the head of the assassins, to find it. But you see, Al-Mualim betrayed them and used Altair to assassinate the 9 main Templar leaders. This included both Crusaders and Saracen collaborators, all working together to bring about a Templar-controlled New World Order. Robert de Sable's final plan, which was to unite the Crusaders and Saracens against the assassins, failed when Altair exposed him and killed him in a duel. Even after all of that, the Levantine Templars were not done. They retreated to Cyprus, they rebuilt their forces there, and they tried again under a new leadership. But Altair follows them there and eventually shuts them down again. But to me, the fact that they survived so much and still came back that strong shows how powerful they really were. Now, to be fair, they did try to return later and briefly regain controls of cities like Jerusalem and Damascus during the Renaissance, but the Ottoman Brotherhood of Assassins drove them out once more. So yeah, in the end, the Levantine Templars were one of the more influential and dangerous arms of the Templar Order. Their rise and fall shaped the early war between Assassins and Templars, and it also set the stage for future conflicts. Now, moving into the top 4, I've decided to go with the Order of the Ancients from Assassin's Creed Origins. Now, this order was very powerful, but in a silent kind of way that lets you run a country without anybody even realizing it. By the time we catch them in Origins, it's the 1st century BCE, and they've already wormed their way into every corner of Egyptian society. They had control over pharaohs like Ptolemy XIII, they dominated some important cities like Alexandria, Memphis, and Fayum, and most interesting, at least to me, is that they had their hands in Roman politics too. I mean, they pretty much created rulers themselves and even manipulated some super important figures like Cleopatra and Julius Caesar like they were nothing. And their goal was of course classic Templar stuff taken to the extreme. They wanted total control through godlike artifacts. They were actively trying to unlock a first civilization vault beneath Siwa, using a literal Apple of Eden and a centuries old vendetta against the Magi bloodline to do it. They believed the Magi were some sort of genetic key. Of course, Bayek and his son Kemu were dragged into it, leading to one of the most tragic openings in the entire series, and a revenge mission for Bayek. And even then, the order doesn't break easily. Byzantine spend the whole game tracking down its leaders, and every single one of them is implanted into some sort of real power. And apart from the politics side of the order, they even had muscle, as they also had the Falakis under their control, who, if you don't know, are these heavily armored bounty hunters that roam Egypt hunting enemies of the regime. I mean, there's a reason why they were hunting Bayek for Ptolemy XIII, because Bayek assassinated the Phylakitai of Alexandria, and if you cross the order, these guys will come after you. And even in the game, they're quite stronger than normal enemies. But what makes the order even more dangerous is how long they operated before Bayek and Aya even knew who they were. They had every type of notable figure spanning from Alexandria to Rome. They assassinated Pompey, they manipulated Caesar, and even later they backed Octavian, laying the foundations for the Roman Empire. Their leader Flavius even uses an apple of Eden to control an entire region by manipulating their minds into worshipping him as if he was a god. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, that's a kind of insane level of influence to have. Of course, eventually Bayek and Aya create what would become the Hidden Ones, which is a direct response to the order. They hunted down the ancients one by one, from Medinamun, the Scarab, the Lizard, and so on, to even Flavius and Septimius. But even after all of that, the order simply did not die. It just evolved into something bigger, and as we know, it became the Templar Order later on. Now, coming in at third place, I think, is the Borgia family, featured heavily in Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood. And if there was ever a Templar dynasty that came close to controlling all of Europe, it was them. The Borgia family was a very, and I mean very, power-obsessed organization. It all starts with Rodrigo Borgia, a man who played the long game. He moved in secret for decades, manipulating the politics of Italy, assassinating all of his rivals, and even building a massive Templar network. And his ambition, to be honest, was nothing less than opening an ezio vault beneath the Vatican, and to do that he needed two pieces of Eden, an apple and the papal staff, as well as control of the Catholic Church itself. Once he was elected as Pope, the Borgia had the church, the military, and most of Rome in their pocket. I mean, even at one point, kings like Louis XII of France and Ferdinand II of Aragon were answering to them, the Borgias. So clearly their influence went beyond Italy. Rodrigo and the Borgia used allies like the Pazzi in Florence and the Barbarigo family in Venice to spread their Templar influence. They even tried to control cities by installing puppet rulers and removing anybody who stood in their way. And then came Cesare Borgia, Rodrigo's son. Now, where Rodrigo was, the brains, kind of, Cesare was a warlord. He took over as Grand Master and launched a very brutal campaign to unify Italy under the Templar rule. He led literal armies. He even used Leonardo da Vinci's war machines, and at the start of Brotherhood he even attacked the assassin stronghold of Montergione, killing Mario Auditore and stealing the Apple of Eden. But as with most Templar downfalls, it was ego that ended them. Unlike a lot of Templar branches where it's just one person taking them down, it was actually Ezio and the Assassin Brotherhood that slowly dismantled Cesare's forces and then took back Rome. They also eventually defeated both Borgia men. Well, kind of. Rodrigo was of course poisoned by his own son, so that's quite tragic. But Cesare Borgia was tossed off from the walls of Vienna Castle. Now, I think to me what makes the Borgia family so high in this video is quite simple. They had it all, and they even nearly reshaped Europe as a whole. If it was not for Ezio and the Italian Brotherhood fighting back, I do think the Borgias could have easily succeeded. In fact, I think most other assassins would have probably failed if Ezio did not. Now, at second place, I've decided to go with the Colonial Rite of the Templar Order, or rather the Colonial Templars from Assassin's Creed Rogue, AC3, and technically AC Liberation. However, I class Liberation as its own thing with the Louisiana Rite. Now, the Colonial Rite was the branch that operated in North America during the 18th century. Unlike in Europe, the Templars did not start off with a strong grip at all, as they had to build it from scratch. We do kind of see it start properly when Reginald Birch sent Haytham Kenway to the colonies in 1754 to find a first civilization temple. While Haytham Kenway did not find the site, he decided to stay and start building the Templar presence from the grounds up. This led to the formal creation of the Colonial Rite, with Haytham Kenway as its first Grand Master, and a shit ton of skilled Templar allies alongside him. But to be honest, the real turning point came with Shay, a former assassin who switched sides after realizing his Brotherhood's actions were causing disasters. Shay became the Colonial Templars' most effective weapon. He played a big part in dismantling almost all of the Assassin Brotherhood in North America piece by piece, taking down people like Hope, Adewale, Liam, and many others, and then finally crippling their mentor Achilles Davenport. Well, he didn't technically cripple him, that was of course Haytham. Now this left the Templars in near total control of the colonies by the end of Rogue, and we see this in AC3 as the Templars are on top throughout the entire game. But throughout AC3 that control does eventually start to slip. The American Revolution at this time brings a ton of problems. So what do the Colonial Templars do? Well, they try to guide the chaos to suit their vision of a new world order, but this would be built on order and control, not British rule. What Haytham and his Templars want is to see the colonies independent, but, and this is the big but, under Templar influence only. Of course, unfortunately for him, Achilles' last student, rather than Hagedon or Connor, comes of age. He fights alongside the revolutionaries and systematically dismantles the Colonial Templar leadership, killing important figures like Charles Lee, William Johnson, and even Haytham Kenway, his own father. By the end of the revolution, the colonial Rite collapses. Connor re-establishes the Brotherhood in the US, and for a while the Templars lose their grip. But not for long, because they reorganized as the American Rite, influencing events like the Civil War, infiltrating the US government, and laying the groundwork for what would eventually become Abstergo Industries. And speaking of Abstergo, and now at the very top of the Templar pyramid we have Abstergo, the modern face of the Templar order. If you thought the Borgia were dangerous or the Colonial Rite were powerful, Abstergo is beyond any of that. This is pretty much essentially a secret society that's global. They were founded in the early 20th century, and their strategy was to dominate the world through capitalism and science. And crazy enough, they pulled it off. By the 21st century, Abstergo had its hands in everything, literally everything: medicine, technology, finance, even entertainment. Now, while the general public saw Abstergo as another successful multinational, they quietly shaped entire governments around the world. They influenced many wars over the years, to the point where people like Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin were merely puppets for them. They even played a massive part in the assassination of JFK, and they funded technology decades ahead of its time. They were also behind the moon landing, and they used the literal CIA and other intelligence groups as tools. But of course, make no mistake, their goal has never changed. Abstergo wants total control through pieces of Eden and via genetic memory. Their biggest weapon is the Animus, a machine that lets them access people's genetic memories. With this machine, they can track down the locations of pieces of Eden and study important events in history. Over time, they've turned that into a full system of memory farming. They no longer need descendants to access history. They just upload important moments into digital systems for other agents to use. They also pushed entertainment as a way to control culture. Abstergo Entertainment, for example. They let people relive curated historical quote-unquote experiences, all while hiding real truth and rewriting history to fit the Templar worldview. It's really just propaganda masked as entertainment. And at one point over the years, Abstergo nearly succeeded in launching the Abstergo satellite, which was a powerful tool that was designed to use the power of a piece of Eden to control the literal planet all at once. So when we think of historical Templars as evil because they want to control a nation or a region, Abstergo wants to control the entire planet. They also pioneered some of the Templars' most unhinged campaigns, like the Great Purge, which nearly wiped out assassins in one generation. Their agents like Warren Vidic and Daniel Cross were just ruthless, and when they could not kill an assassin, they recruited them. I mean, take Daniel Cross. Now, he's not an assassin, but he was once a normal person. But Abstergo stole his childhood and programmed his mind, to the point where one day, unknowingly, he would assassinate the assassin mentor. Of course, he didn't know it, but his entire purpose had been predetermined, and his death was the final proof of how far Abstergo would go to win their secret war. I think what really makes Abstergo truly terrifying to me is how normalized they are to the public. They're not an organization where they send armies into the streets. They're already in your home, your phone, your medicine cabinet. People just don't see them coming. For all we know, I could be part of Abstergo, and that's what makes them the most powerful Templar faction in the entire franchise, hands down.